It began like most HOA nightmares do, quietly, with a letter. I was up at my lake cabin for the summer, enjoying the kind of silence you can't buy in the city. Just me, the crisp morning air, and the gentle slap of Silver Pine Lake against the dock. That peace shattered when I noticed a crisp white envelope tucked under the windshield wiper of my old Ford pickup. The kind of envelope that screamed trouble. It wasn't from a friend or a neighbor or even a curious tourist. No, this one had the bold, self-important seal of the Silver Pine Homeowners Association, blood red and embossed like they were running a government, not a neighborhood club. The irony? I wasn't even part of the HOA. Not officially, not legally, not in any way that should have mattered. My lake cabin wasn't in their development. It stood on the far edge of the lake, half hidden by tall pine and cedar, the same way it had, stood for over 50 years. My grandfather, Emmett Granger, built it in the 1970s with his bare hands. Back then, there were no subdivisions, no community bylaws, and definitely no self-appointed rulers with clipboards. Inside the envelope was a notice of non-compliance. The charges were laughable: improper waste management, my compost heap; unapproved structure, the dock, which had stood there longer than the HOA had existed; and the real kicker, unauthorized occupancy of property not recognized as an HOA-sanctioned dwelling. It was like being told I didn't belong in my own home. Then came the final line: you have 30 days to vacate or face civil penalties and forced removal. I laughed at first. Not the kind of laugh that reaches your gut, but the dry, bitter kind you get when someone completely underestimates you. I'd dealt with people like this before, self-righteous nobodies who found power in paper and signatures. But what they didn't know was that I had something better. Proof. Real proof. Not bylaws, or maps drawn up by a developer's intern. I had the original deed, the kind signed, stamped, and registered back in 1971. The kind with legal teeth, and not just to the cabin. My grandfather, God rest his ornery soul, had bought the entire eastern lot of Silver Pine Lake. 43 acres of waterfront, wooded, hills, and a private creek that fed into the lake. The HOA? They came along much later, in the late 90s, trying to turn the west side into a gated luxury community. And somewhere along the way, without challenge or question, they began treating my family land like it was common area. Nobody ever noticed, because nobody ever pushed back. Until now. That night I didn't sleep much. I sat out on the porch with a kerosene lantern and the old map rolled across my table, tracing boundary lines and checking parcel numbers. Every inch checked out. My grandfather had even had it surveyed twice, once in 71 and again in 85. It was watertight. I knew what I had to do. The next morning I drove into town. Silver Pine County Courthouse was as sleepy as ever, with a chipped eagle statue guarding its front steps and a clerk's office that smelled like dust and printer ink. I asked for the land registry archives and gave them my parcel number. The clerk, Darrell, I think his name was, eyed me over his reading glasses as he flipped through records. "You know this says the whole East Shore is yours, right?" he said, tapping the deed. "I do now," I replied, already pulling out my wallet. I paid for 20 certified copies. Then I drove straight back into the HOA's turf. The Silver Pine HOA had a bulletin board outside the community center. I nailed one copy of the deed to it. Then I taped another to Karen's front door, Karen being the HOA president, queen bee of petty grievances. I hit every community mailbox with the same message: evict me, and I take the lake with me. Within 24 hours, the neighborhood exploded. Phones rang off the hook. HOA group chats went nuclear. By sunset, Karen was standing outside my gate with 2 board members, clutching a clipboard like it could save her. "This is all a misunderstanding," she started, her voice like honey laced with vinegar. "You should have registered your dwelling years ago." My what? I stepped out onto the porch, still sipping my coffee. You mean the cabin that predates your subdivision by 2 decades? You can't just post legal documents without approval. I own the land. I own the lakefront. Hell, I own the dock you're threatening to fine me over. She turned, red, then pale. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her tote bag and handed me a formal letter marked, Intent to Litigate. This is your final warning. I looked her dead in the eye. No, Karen. This is your final warning, and I shut the gate. That was day 1. By day 3, I noticed surveillance. Someone, maybe the HOA security contractor, had parked a black SUV just outside my tree line. At night, I could see the faint glint of a camera lens from the trees. I started documenting everything. Every letter, every visit, every drone that buzzed a little too close overhead. By day 5, a group of residents, 10, maybe 15, came down to the cabin with beer, lawn chairs, and stories of their own HOA harassment. A woman named Martha told me they fined her for painting her shutters a shade of green that wasn't on the approved color list. A retired veteran named Paul said they threatened to foreclose when he parked his RV on his own driveway for 3 days. The more I listened, the more I realized. This wasn't about me. It was about a pattern, a quiet conquest. They had slowly, silently expanded their reach over the years, taking in land they didn't own, enforcing rules nobody had voted on, and silencing anyone who spoke out. My cabin was just the latest target. But I wasn't just going to speak out, I was going to fight, and not with petitions or angry emails, with documents, media, and legal firepower. I called my cousin, a land use attorney out in Denver, and sent him scans of everything. Within hours, he confirmed what I suspected. The HOA had zero legal claim over my land, and their attempts at eviction bordered on harassment and fraud. By day 7, the local newspaper picked up the story. Their headline read, Local man threatened by HOA over land. He legally owns lake. Rights in jeopardy? That's when the TV cameras came, and when the Silver Pine HOA realized they'd kicked a hornet's nest wrapped in red tape and steel resolve. I wasn't going anywhere. And if they wanted war over this cabin, they were going to lose more than just a fight. They were going to lose the lake. The morning after I dropped the deed bombshell, the lake was eerily quiet. Mist hovered like ghostly fingers above the water, curling and drifting lazily across the surface. A loon called out somewhere in the distance, and that sound, the solitary, echoing cry, felt like the only thing that hadn't changed. The silence wasn't peace. It was a loaded pause, a breath before impact. Because the HOA wasn't going to take my revelation lying down. Word had spread like wildfire. I knew it would. In a community where everyone gossiped over hedge trimmings, and who left their trash can out an extra day, dropping a land ownership bomb like that was akin to throwing a grenade in a library. I figured most of the homeowners didn't know the full history of the lake. The chairman of the HOA, Grant Maynard, had probably assumed I was bluffing, just some recluse with a beat-up cabin and a chip on his shoulder. That was until he saw the notarized deed, county-stamped and signed decades ago, with my name printed clear as daylight. It was a rude awakening. See, my grandfather bought the land in the late 60s, back when this region was just forest and pasture. No gated communities, no HOA boards, just raw earth and blue sky. When developers swooped in years later to carve out luxury homes and tidy cul-de-sacs, they hit a snag. One parcel, a long, narrow strip that curled like a finger around the lakes. North and west shores wasn't for sale. My grandfather refused, and when he passed, it came to me. They built around it, literally. The HOA's map even showed it, Lot 76A, outlined but labeled as undeveloped. What they didn't mention was that it wasn't undeveloped. It was untouchable. The mistake the HOA made was assuming my lack of fences meant absence of ownership. But kindness isn't ignorance. I'd simply allowed the community to use the lake out of goodwill. That goodwill was over. When I walked into town that morning, it was like stepping into a silent courtroom. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Some folks offered tight, polite nods. Others glared like I'd clubbed their golden retriever. At the diner, Rita the waitress, sharp as a tack and blessed with the moral compass of a frontier judge, grinned as she poured me coffee. "Well, well." "Mr. Land Baron himself," she said. "So, what's next? You planning to build a moat?" I smiled. "No moat. Just a little cleanup. And then it's time to set some boundaries." She raised a brow. "Literal or metaphorical?" "Both." Back at the cabin, I went into the attic, a space I hadn't touched in years. Dust danced, in the filtered light like ash from an old fire. I dragged out Granddad's chest, an old army trunk with rusty hinges. Inside were rolled maps, manila folders, and hand-scrawled notes in his meticulous penmanship. I found easement agreements, boundary surveys, photographs, even correspondence with the county from the 70s. He wasn't just a landowner, he was a custodian of the property. One letter stood out. Dated 1974, it read, "I do not grant access to the developer nor to its agents. My land is private and will remain so." It gave me chills. The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork and phone calls. The HOA had delivered a cease and desist notice, citing unregulated modifications and unauthorized use of communal space. I laughed when I read it. Their definition of communal space was as flexible as their ethics. I handed the notice to my lawyer, Mark Dorsey, a former real estate litigator who looked like he lived on black coffee and court battles. He barely glanced at it before chuckling. "They're trying to rewrite property law with a newsletter," he said. "This is a slam dunk." Mark filed a formal response with the county, attaching certified copies of the deed and boundary survey. He also submitted a complaint alleging HOA overreach, trespassing, and attempted intimidation. That caught the county's attention. By Friday, the HOA received an official warning to cease enforcement actions on my land pending investigation. You'd think that would slow them down. It didn't. Instead, they doubled down. That weekend, I noticed HOA volunteers patrolling the shoreline in golf carts. They posted temporary signs that read, "No fishing, no bonfires, boat stickers. Required." One guy even tried to tell a pair of teens they couldn't skip stones because it disrupted nesting loons. So I went on offense. I had 6 large wooden signs made, bold letters in red on white backgrounds. "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." I planted them like flags around the lake perimeter. Then I added trail cameras, installed solar floodlights, and placed motion sensors near the dock. The HOA responded by calling an emergency meeting. I was invited, but I wasn't going to be ambushed. I brought Mark. I also invited the county assessor and a deputy sheriff, just as observers. Nothing cools bluster like a badge and a clipboard. The meeting was held in the community center. It looked like a town hall, but the mood was more like a kangaroo court. Grant, in his usual beige polo and too tight khakis, sat at the head of the long table with a gavel he loved too much. "This land has been part of our community for over 20 years, he began. "Used," I said, standing. "Not owned. You don't get to claim something just because it's been convenient. We've maintained it," another board member chimed in. "The trails, the dock." "That's interesting," I said, pulling out photos from 2 months prior. The dock was rotting. Trash littered the path. A fire ring smoldered with beer cans. "Is this your definition of maintenance?" A few people squirmed. "We were under the impression," Grant began. "That I wouldn't fight back," I interrupted. "That I'd roll over and let you claim my land like a game of Monopoly?" The sheriff cleared his throat. "Mr. Maynard, let's keep this civil." Mark stepped forward and handed Grant a folder. Inside is a formal declaration revoking any implied or informal easement. Access to the lake is restricted. If you want to use it, you'll need to negotiate a lease. Otherwise, it's trespassing. You could hear a pin drop. Grant thumped the gavel, hard. You're destroying neighborhood harmony. I'm enforcing my rights, I said. You destroyed harmony when you fined me for walking across my own dock. One resident raised her hand. Why didn't you tell us before? I didn't think I needed to, I replied. I thought good neighbors respected property lines. I let people use the shore out of kindness, but that kindness was mistaken for weakness. I'm correcting that. The meeting broke down after that. Voices rose. Some demanded I sell, others threatened countersuits, but Mark just smiled. We welcome litigation, he said. Discovery will be enlightening. Over the next week, things got tense. Someone spray-painted one of my signs with Community Lake. I replaced it and added 2 cameras. Then came the flyers, bright yellow, stuffed in mailboxes and tucked under windshield wipers. Lake access revoked, thanks to one man. Petty, sure. But it didn't faze me. Instead, I got to work. I rebuilt the dock. Not the rickety plywood mess the HOA had nailed together, but a sturdy composite wood platform with iron moorings. I added picnic tables, a gazebo, and a kayak rack. I even installed a little wooden library, one of those free book boxes. Then I started inviting families from outside the HOA, locals who'd respected the land, veterans, school teachers, retirees. I issued limited-use permits, no charge, just courtesy rules. Pack out your trash, respect the water, and no amplified music. Every one of them thanked me. That, of course, made the HOA apoplectic. They proposed buying the land, offered me a check. Not for sale, I said. Name your price, Grant said, exasperated. You can't afford it, I told him. Not with your annual dues and a bake sale. They tried zoning pressure next. Petitioned the county to designate the lake as an environmentally protected zone. Their goal? To restrict development and fishing so tightly that I'd give up. But Mark showed up to the hearing with 3 decades of proof that the land had been privately maintained. Photos, water quality tests, wildlife counts. Their motion was denied unanimously, but the most desperate move came one stormy evening. The power flickered at the cabin. Wind howled outside. I was sitting by the fireplace reading one of my grandfather's journals when the motion light triggered. I stood, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped onto the porch. There they were, 3 men, 2 in hooded sweatshirts, one with a crowbar, trying to pry off one of my signs. Put it down, I said. They froze. We're taking back our lake, one of them muttered. I raised my phone and hit record. Say that again. He looked right at the camera. You don't scare us. Good, I said, because you'll be famous. They ran. The next morning, the sheriff arrested 2 of them. One was the HOA's own security contractor. That didn't play well in the press, especially when the local paper ran the headline, Private Lake Owner Defends Property from HOA Thugs. After that, the power started to shift. More residents began questioning things. Fees, leadership, priorities. A petition circulated to dissolve the current board. Within 2 months, Grant was out. A new board formed, this time led by residents who valued cooperation over control. We met, civilly this time. They asked for limited access. I offered a compromise. Community events could apply for permits. Rules would be strict, but access would be possible again, on my terms. And just like that, the war ended. In the quiet that followed, I'd often sit by the dock at dawn, coffee in hand, watching the mist lift off the lake. I heard birdsong, the ripple of water against the shore. No engines, no golf carts, just peace. It wasn't just about winning a legal fight. It was about defending a legacy, my grandfather's name, my land. The HOA tried to erase it, but in the end, they only helped me remember.